If you want to know an OB-GYN's 5 most controversial takes that I sometimes don't say aloud when I'm at medical conferences, and a huge announcement from me, if you do, stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Dr. Jen Lincoln, board-certified OB-GYN, author, educator, and I am back after a few months off on YouTube, and there's a reason, and maybe you see it over my shoulder there. Yes, I wrote my second book, The Birth Book, an OB-GYN's Guide to Demystifying Labor and Delivery. And I just want you to know today that before this book, which comes out March 24th, 2026, there has been no book written by an OB-GYN that just focuses on the labor and delivery part. So I decided to write it. It's all question and answer style. And while it might not be out till the spring, you can pre-order it today. The link is up there. And when you do and you submit a proof of purchase, you get a little sneak peek, a little freebie. So you should go do that. And I thought, what better way to let you know that this book is happening than to film this video today, which is 5 of my controversial, I guess, opinions, hot takes that I wish weren't. Some of my colleagues might watch this and feel a little angsty, or maybe they disagree with me, but I'm going to tell you them because I think that nuance and evidence matter. All right, buckle up. Let's get into it. Hot take number 1 is that continuous fetal monitoring is way overused and is harmful. So you may have seen this New York Times article that came out a little bit ago saying exactly this, that it's like one of our worst tests that we use. We use it on labor and delivery, and it has been responsible for a huge increase in the C-section rate. And they're absolutely right. So here's what I mean. When you're laboring in a hospital, there's often this expectation that you'll be hooked up to these monitors for your entire labor. And it's not only monitoring your contractions, but it's also monitoring your baby's heartbeat, like every single heartbeat. And that sounds great in theory because we want to watch our baby closely. The problem is that it came out decades ago and we thought it was going to do this great thing where it was going to decrease babies who died in labor or who had neurological difficulties afterwards, things like cerebral palsy. And unfortunately, this technology has not done any of that, but it has led to an increase in C-sections as well as forceps and vacuum deliveries because of what we see on the monitor, and we go, oh my goodness, that looks terrible, or I don't know if it looks terrible, but I'm worried enough, and if I don't act now, I'm going to get sued because my field, obstetrics, we are the highest sued physicians out there. And so we practice defensive medicine because we're also using this tool that we're forced to use. It's not going to go anywhere, and it sucks. So I prefer something called intermittent monitoring, which is where we're intermittently checking in on your baby's heart rate for folks who qualify, who have low-risk pregnancies. We've seen that it's just as safe for these patients, and it gives you a lot more freedom to move around and just not to feel like you're hooked up all the time, and it gives us less chance to see something, go, oh, could that be an issue? And it turns out it never would be, but we act because we feel compelled to. Now, if you're high risk, if you're on Pitocin, if you have other high risk conditions like preeclampsia, then yeah, we're gonna monitor you because we know that, especially with a medicine like Pitocin, we need to make sure that we're not dosing it up in an incorrect way that could then cause harm to your baby. But if you are low risk, I genuinely think we should be doing way less continuous monitoring. Okay, controversial opinion number 2, the whole deli meat thing that you're not supposed to eat deli meat in pregnancy. I think that's actually way overblown. And if you haven't heard about this, the reason we tell somebody who's pregnant not to eat things like cold cuts is because there's a risk theoretically of listeria, which is bad in pregnancy. And yes, technically deli meat can carry listeria, but so can lots of other foods that we don't tell pregnant people to avoid, like cantaloupe or salads or ice cream. There have been more listeria outbreaks from produce like fruits than deli meats in recent years. So the actual risk of getting listeria from deli meats is actually very small. And when you look at other countries like the UK, they don't have that same recommendation if you're pregnant. So here's what I would tell my patients, that if you're buying deli meat from a reputable place and it's freshly sliced and you're practicing, good food storage and handling, then it's probably okay to have that turkey sandwich. Now, if you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to stress me out and freak me out, by all means, ignore me. Don't eat the deli meat or heat it up before you do. The bigger risks in pregnancy are undercooked meats, unpasteurized foods, unwashed produce. So yes, if you feel like you don't want to eat deli meat, have at it. But also realize there's a lot more important things when it comes to food safety in pregnancy. Okay, controversial opinion number 3, and this might ruffle some feathers, is that most planned home births are totally safe and end up totally fine. And when I say that, I mean for carefully selected, low-risk patients with a qualified midwife and a transport plan if you need to go to the hospital. Planned home birth is actually likely a very safe and reasonable option. And I talk about that in my book, and I give you actual statistics so you can make an informed choice. I know you're like, a hospital-based OB-GYN is saying planned home birth is safe. What the heck? Hear me out. The data shows that for low-risk people who have a qualified, trained medical attendant, home birth outcomes are relatively similar. Not totally, but the risk that they're going to avoid things like interventions like induction and C-section are actually way lower if you have a home birth. Now, there are some really important caveats here. I'm talking about carefully selected low-risk people. You keep hearing me say that. When it creeps, right? When you're like, well, you're almost low risk. I mean, you have high blood pressure, but it's not that high. You've had a C-section before. You've had twins. Like, you're not totally preterm. Or when you don't have somebody who's trained there, and that can refer to something called free birthing. This is where you often have no prenatal care and you don't have anybody who has any medical training at your birth. I made a whole video about that up here. That's where things get a little sketchy, and that's where we see the bad outcomes that give home birth a bad name. Here's my thing. Birth is not just a medical event. For some people, going to the hospital does not feel safe, or they would rather be in their home environment and they feel more respected there and they feel like they're going to be less traumatized there. And for those people, we need to, instead of just scaring them and saying, your baby could die at home, we need to give actual numbers and let people make an informed decision. So I would much rather support someone in making a truly informed decision about home birth than having them feel so unsupported that they free birth at home without any medical provider at all. Okay, the fourth controversial thing I'm going to say is that when it comes to eating and drinking in labor, it should be allowed. So in most hospitals, they have a policy where once you're in active labor or you have an epidural, you have to just have clears, or you have nothing, which is even worse. But the idea is that you can just have things like popsicles or water or apple juice. And the reasoning for this is the fear of aspiration. And this is where, let's say you need emergency anesthesia, you're put to sleep, and you potentially throw up some of that food. It goes into your lungs, and you get something called aspiration pneumonia, which could lead to things like cardiac arrest and death. And that sounds horrible. I agree. However, the risk is so tiny, but this has become hospital policy because a lot of these rules were made back, I think it was in the 40s, when a lot of people were being put to sleep for C-section. So the risk was higher, but now that's extremely rare. It's so incredibly rare with modern anesthesia techniques that the risk of having a serious aspiration event in labor is about 1 in 150,000 to 1 in 300,000, which, if you ask me, is pretty rare. Meanwhile, labor is like the hardest things on our body that most of us will ever do. It's like running a marathon and like then some. So to not have any fuel other than some IV fluids, which yes, gives you like some sodium and some chloride and maybe some sugar, like that's not enough. And the research shows that allowing people to eat light meals during labor, it doesn't increase complications and it actually helps them feel better and have more energy. Other countries like the UK, again, they seem to be ahead of a lot of things when it comes to this. They allow people to eat light meals in labor. And most people, if they're allowed to do this, they're not choosing hamburgers and pizza, they're choosing things like yogurt or protein bars. Now, the caveat here is that if you're like super high risk of potentially needing a C-section under anesthesia, then yeah, maybe you don't want to be eating in labor. But for most people, it's likely just fine. And the data has shown that when they're allowed to have access to food, even if they don't eat it, they're more likely to rate their birth as being more satisfying. And that experience is huge. So starving people, it's an outdated concept. And I really need all of us as a medical team to like come together and update our policies and practices. Okay, my final opinion when it comes to birth that might be controversial, but I hope that it's not is that birth trauma is hugely unrecognized. We don't talk enough about it and we don't realize that medical interventions can lead to birth trauma. And in fact, 1 in 3 people who have a baby in the United States report their birth as traumatic. And I'm not just saying that they had a postpartum hemorrhage or an emergency C-section. They just felt that it was traumatic for whatever reason. And there aren't trauma Olympics. If it felt traumatic to you, it was traumatic. Now, I've had people who've had healthy babies and what I might consider a very successful birth. By medical standards, they might leave from the hospital feeling violated or unheard or traumatized by that experience. And when they try to talk about it, they're just told, well, you're healthy, your baby's fine, right? Healthy mom, healthy baby. So like, that's all that matters. That's not true. So yes, healthy mom, healthy baby, of course that's important, but your experience matters too. How you're treated, whether or not you feel respected or heard, it matters. We need to realize that lack of informed consent is traumatic, that feeling ignored is traumatic, that procedures done without proper consent or explanation is traumatic, and that even emergency interventions can be traumatic, like having a C-section or needing forceps. And it doesn't mean you're not grateful for that and you're so glad that somebody was there to help you in that moment, but it can still feel traumatic. It doesn't mean that you're ungrateful for your care. And I think practitioners, we need to recognize that. It's not a direct insult to us. So birth trauma is real. It can lead to things like postpartum depression, anxiety, PTSD. It may mean that somebody who originally wanted a bigger family now chooses not to have one. And so when it does happen, we need to look out for it, we need to validate it, and we need to not minimize it. I talk about all of these controversial hot takes and more in my book, The Birth Book. So like I said, you can go up here and pre-order here. But I want to know, what do you think about my opinions? And if you don't agree with me, that's okay. Let's talk about it. Because when we talk about it in a respectful, civilized way, it means we're discussing things and we can potentially move the needle, which is what we need to do so desperately in this country. All right, before I go, like, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell so you never miss an upload. And until next time, stay safe, my friends.